The storm wasn't just rain and wind. It was a monster, clawing at the stable doors, its voice a howl across the black Montana night. Clara Whitmore felt the rough wood press into her back. Her satchel was a lead weight in her arms. Every crunch of boots on wet straw sent a spike of ice through her veins. Then the doorway filled. A shadow, tall and broad as a mountain pine. His voice was gravel and cold fury. "You're trespassing." Steel-gray eyes pinned her in place. Her breath hitched. She'd run 1,000 miles to escape a devil, only to find another one standing right in front of her. This wasn't just a rancher. This was a reckoning, a storm fiercer than any weather. Clara Whitmore hadn't come to the Montana Territory looking for a friend. She'd come because the map stopped here, because the mountains were a wall between her and her past. She'd come because the Bitterroot Valley was a place where ghosts couldn't follow. Or so she'd hoped. She was desperate. She was tired. But she was not broken. Not yet. The town of Hamilton was a sodden mess, its wooden signs weeping rainwater, its streets a thick, brown soup. She'd walked for hours, clutching the only thing she had left in the world, before a single lantern drew her toward the smell of hay and horses. It smelled like the only safe place left on earth. But safety was a lie. The man in the doorway was Logan Mallister. He was carved from the same hard granite as the mountains around them. His name was a legend whispered in the valley, a rancher whose herd stretched for miles, a widower who'd buried his heart 6 feet under with his wife. They said he lived for 2 things now, his land and his boy. His gray eyes weren't just looking at her. They were taking inventory, tallying up her secrets, her fears, her weaknesses. It took him less than a second. She lifted her chin. If she flinched, if she showed even a crack in her armor, he'd throw her back out into the monster. And the monster would win. "I need work," she said. Her voice didn't even tremble. "I handle horses better than any man you've ever hired." The silence was a living thing. It stretched and tightened until a horse stamped its hoof, shattering the tension. Logan's lips were a thin, hard line. She braced herself for the dismissal, for the cold mud waiting outside. But then something flickered in his eyes. It wasn't pity. It wasn't kindness. It was recognition. He knew what it looked like to have nothing left to lose. Clara's stomach twisted into a knot. She couldn't tell if that flicker of understanding was going to be her salvation, or her ruin. Logan didn't move. He leaned against the stable post, his arms crossed over a chest as broad as a barrel. The lantern light cut sharp shadows across his jaw. Clara had met men like him before, back in a life she no longer claimed. Men who expected obedience, men who saw a woman and saw only weakness. She steeled herself. The rejection was coming. "You handle horses, you say?" The words were low, dripping with doubt. But there was something else there, too. A sliver of curiosity. "Yes," Clara said, locking her gaze with his. "I grew up breaking colts. My father bred thoroughbreds." It wasn't a full lie. But it wasn't the full truth either. The parts she left out were the ones that had burned her old life to the ground. The parts that had sent her running west with nothing but the clothes on her back and a fire in her soul. Logan's eyebrow twitched. "Most women don't boast of breaking colts. Most women don't have to." She shot back. Her chin went up another inch, a challenge. The stable was quiet again, just the sound of the storm and the restless shuffle of the animals. He was sizing her up, deciding if she was worth the risk. A stranger was always a risk. Then he jerked his head toward a nearby stall. A big chestnut gelding was pacing inside, its eyes rolling white with fear, biting at the air. "Prove it," Logan said. Just 2 words. A command. Clara didn't wait for a second invitation. She slid the heavy bolt, slipped into the stall, and the smell of horse and fear filled her senses. She placed her palm flat against the animal's trembling shoulder. A current of pure panic surged through her arm, but her voice was calm. steady as a slow-moving river. "Easy, boy. Easy now. No one's going to hurt you." She murmured nonsense words, stroking his neck in long, slow lines. She didn't force it. She invited. She offered peace in the middle of the storm. The horse's ears flickered. Its ragged breathing started to slow. The tension in its body began to melt away under her touch. Minute by minute, the wild fear in its eyes faded, replaced by a weary trust. When she finally slipped the halter over his head, the stable was silent except for the sound of the gelding's soft chewing. She turned back to face Logan. His eyes hadn't softened, not one bit, but they held something that wasn't there before. Respect. It was reluctant. It was rough-edged. But it was real. "You've got a hand for it," he admitted. The words sounded like they'd been pulled from him against his will. Relief hit her like a physical blow, but she kept her face a mask of stone. "Then I'll take the job." He was still studying her, weighing the risk of a woman with a secret past against the undeniable skill he'd just witnessed. Before he could speak, a small voice cut through the heavy air. "Pa?" Clara turned. A boy, no older than 10, stood in the doorway. His hair was a tousled mess. His bare feet were caked in mud. His eyes were the exact same storm gray as his father's, but they held a softness, a curiosity that the world hadn't yet beaten out of him. He was clutching a small, hand-carved wooden horse, its edges worn smooth by years of play. Logan's entire posture changed. The hardness around his eyes didn't disappear, but it eased. "Ethan," he said, his voice softer than she'd thought possible. "Go back to bed. It's late." But the boy's gaze was fixed on Clara. He was assessing her, just like his father had. "Who's she?" Clara felt a sudden, sharp awareness of the mud staining her dress, the exhaustion carved into her face. She managed a small, tired smile. "Just someone looking for a chance." Ethan tilted his head. A slow grin spread across his face, revealing a gap where a tooth used to be. That simple, innocent flash of mischief did something to Clara's heart she hadn't expected. It warmed a place that had been cold for a very, very long time. Logan's voice broke the spell. It was back to being hard and unyielding. "You'll start in the morning. We'll see if you last." It wasn't a welcome. It wasn't an offer of kindness. It was a challenge. Clara gave a single sharp nod. It was enough. The door he'd opened was just a crack, but it was wide enough for her to slip through, and as the storm finally began to fade, she made a silent vow. She would not fail. Morning broke pale and cold over the Bitterroot Valley. The world was washed clean, hushed and dripping. Clara was up before the sun, her body aching from the small, lumpy bed in a corner of the main ranch house. It was a charity she hadn't asked for, but had been in no position to refuse. She braided her hair with fingers that were swift and sure, pulled on boots that had seen too many miles. The air smelled of wet pine and wood smoke. It was the smell of a life she'd never imagined, a world away from the silk dresses and stifling ballrooms of her past. That life was a ghost. It had died in a single night of shattering glass and broken promises. All she had left from it was a secret and a skill. Out here, under this vast, empty sky, her skill with horses was the only thing that could keep her alive. The secret, she knew, was the one thing that could get her killed. When she reached the corral, Logan was already there. His shoulders were a wall against the gray dawn as he pitched hay into a long trough. He didn't turn as she approached, but she felt his eyes on her, a heavy, assessing gaze. "You're early," he stated. It wasn't a compliment. "You told me to start," she replied, grabbing a pitchfork. She mimicked his movements, her rhythm steady and strong. Her arms screamed in protest, but she ignored them. Weakness was a luxury she couldn't afford. He shot her a sideways glance. Was that a flicker of amusement at the corner of his mouth? Most quit after the first morning. Then I'm not most. The words came out sharper than she meant them to, a spark of defiance. But she didn't take them back. In this new world, respect wasn't given. It had to be clawed for, fought for, taken. The day was a blur of hard labor, mucking out stalls, hauling water, mending tack. Logan worked alongside her, never speaking, but always watching. He was testing her, pushing her, waiting for her to break. She would not break. Late in the afternoon, he sent her into the round pen with a restless black mare. The horse was all coiled energy and simmering rage, nostrils flared, eyes wild. It was a test, and they both knew it. Clara moved into the center of the pen. Her voice was a low hum, a calming current in the charged air. She didn't approach the mare. She let the mare come to her. The horse circled, kicking up dirt, testing the boundaries. Clara mirrored its movements, a slow, deliberate dance. She was patient. She was calm. She was a rock in the middle of the horse's storm. Logan leaned on the fence, arms crossed, his face an unreadable mask. He was waiting for the moment it all went wrong. The moment the horse would charge, the moment she would turn and run. But that moment never came. Slowly, agonizingly, the mare's frantic energy began to ebb. Its head dropped. Its ears relaxed. It took a hesitant step toward her, then another. Finally, it stood before her, licking and chewing, the ultimate sign of submission. Clara reached out a slow hand, slipped the halter over its head, and stroked the damp, warm neck. Logan's silence was more powerful than any words of praise. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was a victory. Small, but a victory nonetheless. Her days weren't just about horses, though. They were about the boy. Ethan became her shadow. He followed her everywhere, his little wooden horse always in his hand. At first, he was quiet, his gray eyes watching her with a cautious curiosity. He was a boy who had learned too early that people leave. Then, one afternoon, she was on the porch, fixing a broken bridle. He sat down near her, not too close, but not far either. "You talk to them," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Clara looked up. "Who?" "The horses," he clarified, his eyes wide. She smiled, a real smile this time. "They understand more than people think. Sometimes they just need someone to listen." She handed him the leather strap to hold for her. His small fingers closed around it, and in that moment, a fragile bridge of trust was built between them. After that, he was full of questions. Did horses get sad? Where had she come from? Did the moon look the same from there? She answered carefully, weaving a story that was true enough to be believable, but vague enough to hide the dangerous reality. With Ethan, the sharp, guarded edges of her heart began to soften. She found herself laughing, a sound she thought she had forgotten how to make, and Logan watched. She would catch him looking when she was kneeling beside Ethan, helping him carve a new tail for his wooden horse. His face was a stone wall, but she saw the tension in his jaw. He saw what was happening. He saw his son, who had been silent and withdrawn since his mother's death, coming back to life, and it scared him. He kept his distance. For every grudging nod of approval for her work, there were a dozen moments of cold silence. She knew grief. She recognized the way it coiled around a person, a suffocating blanket they couldn't throw off. His was a grief so profound it had frozen him solid. One night, a fierce wind rattled the windows of the ranch house. She had taken refuge in the stable, the warmth and scent of the animals a comfort. She was brushing down the chestnut gelding, the first horse she had calmed, when Logan's shadow fell across the stall. "You've got Ethan smiling again," he said. His voice was rough. Clara's hand paused on the horse's flank. "He's a good boy. He just needs someone to see him." Logan's gaze bored into her. For a split second, she saw something raw and vulnerable in his eyes. A flash of desperate hope. Then, just as quickly, the wall slammed back down. He turned away. Don't make promises you can't keep. The words were a slap, but she understood. He had lost the most important person in his life. He was terrified of letting anyone else in, only to lose them too. He was protecting his heart. He was protecting his son. Clara swallowed the lump in her throat. Her own voice was quiet, but firm. I don't make promises, Mr. Mallister. I just do what needs to be done. The silence that followed was heavy with everything they weren't saying. It was thick with unspoken fear, with a strange, dangerous attraction that was growing between them like a weed. And in that charged silence, Clara knew. The storm inside this man and the storm inside her were on a collision course. It was going to be beautiful, or it was going to be devastating. The first snows came with a vengeance, a white shroud falling from a steel-gray sky. The mountains disappeared. The valley hunkered down, bracing for the long, hard bite of winter. Every rancher in the territory knew it was a race against time. Get the supplies in from town before the passes became impassable tombs of ice and snow. Logan was hitching the big wagon team at dawn. The air was so cold it burned to breathe. Clara came out of the house, a thick wool shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. You'll need an extra hand, she said. It wasn't a question. His jaw tightened. He didn't look at her. The trail's rough, weather's turning. I've seen worse. Before he could argue, she climbed up onto the wagon seat, setting her small satchel at her feet. She met his gaze, her own unwavering. If you want me to leave this ranch, you say it to my face. Otherwise, I'm coming with you. His eyes, the color of a gathering storm, held hers for a long, silent moment. He was reading her again, looking for the cracks. But all he found was a resolve that matched his own. With a sharp sigh, he swung himself up onto the seat beside her and snapped the reins. The wagon lurched forward into the frozen world. The ride was brutal. The trail was a treacherous ribbon of mud and ice. They didn't speak. The only sounds were the groaning of the wagon wheels and the howl of the wind slicing through the pines. Hours passed. As they rounded a sharp bend that hugged the edge of the roaring river, something spooked the lead horse. A branch, maybe, hidden under the snow. The team shied, eyes rolling in terror, and then they bolted. The wagon slewed sideways, threatening to plunge into the icy rapids below. Hold on! Logan roared, fighting the reins, his muscles straining. But Clara was already moving. She scrambled over the seat, her boots finding purchase on the bucking floorboards. She grabbed for the bridle of the nearest horse, her voice cutting through the panic, sharp and commanding. Easy, boys! Settle now! Easy! She wasn't just shouting. She was communicating, her energy a calming force against their terror. She leaned with them, anticipated their panicked lunges, her own body a counterweight to their fear. Slowly, miraculously, the frenzy began to subside. The mad dash slowed to a trot, then a walk, then a shuddering halt, the wagon's wheels buried deep in a snowbank just inches from the cliff's edge. They sat there, their breaths coming in white, ragged clouds. Logan's knuckles were white on the reins. A muscle jumped in his jaw. You could have been killed, he said, his voice a harsh rasp. So could you, she shot back. Her own heart was hammering against her ribs, but her voice was steady. We did what had to be done. His head snapped around. His eyes were raw, the careful walls he kept around himself completely shattered. That's what my wife used to say. The words just slipped out. He looked shocked at his own admission, like a man who'd accidentally revealed a mortal wound. He quickly looked away, staring out at the frozen river, but not before she saw the profound, bottomless pain in his eyes. She spoke softly, the same way she spoke to a spooked horse. Losing someone doesn't mean you stop needing help, Logan. He didn't reply. But as he coaxed the horses back onto the trail, his shoulder brushed against hers. It was a small thing, but it was more than he'd given her in all the weeks she'd been there. By the time they reached Hamilton, The snow was a blinding curtain. They unloaded the supplies in a shared, silent rhythm, moving like two parts of a single machine. Inside the general store, the locals stared at her. Whispers followed her down the aisles like ghosts. But Logan stood beside her, a silent, unmovable wall. His reputation was a shield, and for the first time she felt it protecting her. The ride home was even worse. Night fell with a sudden, suffocating blackness. Logan took off his heavy sheepskin coat and, without a word, draped it over both their shoulders. She could feel the warmth of him, the solid, steady strength of his body next to hers. And for the first time in a very long time, Clara allowed herself to lean. When the faint light of the ranch finally appeared through the swirling snow, she saw a small figure on the porch holding a lantern. Ethan. He ran to them as they pulled up, his face a mask of pure relief. He launched himself into Clara's arms as she climbed down. She held him tight, his small body trembling against hers. He clung to her, as if he'd been afraid she would vanish into the storm forever. Over the boy's head, she saw Logan watching them. His expression was impossible to read in the flickering lantern light. But something had changed. Something had broken open. The ice around his heart hadn't melted, but it had started to crack. That night, lying in her bed, listening to the wind trying to tear the house apart, Clara faced a terrifying truth. She wasn't just a hired hand anymore. She wasn't just hiding. She had stumbled into the heart of this small, broken family. And the thought of what that might mean, what it might cost her, was more frightening than any bounty hunter, any ghost from her past. Winter clamped its jaws around the valley and refused to let go. The world outside the ranch house was a frozen, silent wasteland. Inside, a fragile warmth was beginning to grow. Clara's days fell into a rhythm of hard work and small moments of grace. The shared smiles with Ethan. The rare, quiet conversations with Logan by the fire after the boy was asleep. But peace in this land was a borrowed thing. It never lasted. The warning came just after dawn, a frantic drumbeat of hooves against the frozen earth. A ranch hand, his face wild with panic, skidded his horse to a halt in the yard. "Rustlers!" he yelled, his words puffing out in white clouds. "Hit the south pasture, drove off at least a dozen head. Tracks lead up toward the ridge." Logan's face transformed. The quiet man was gone. In his place was a predator. His eyes were chips of ice. "Get the men. We ride now." Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. "You'll need me." "You'll stay here," Logan snapped, his voice a whip crack. "Protect Ethan." But Ethan was already there, grabbing her hand, his small face pale with fear. She looked from the terrified boy to the hard-faced man. She couldn't just stand by, not anymore. "I can track," she said, her voice low and steady. "And I can shoot. You know I can." Logan was torn. Every instinct he had screamed at him to lock her and his son inside the house and ride out to face the danger alone. He couldn't bear the thought of another loss. But he saw the fire in her eyes, a blaze of determination that mirrored his own. This wasn't the frightened woman who had stumbled into his barn. This was someone else entirely. With a curse, he grabbed a rifle from the scabbard on his saddle and thrust it into her hands. "Stay close. Don't do anything stupid." They rode hard, the wind a razor against their faces. They found the tracks easily in the snow, a wide trampled scar leading up into the treacherous hills. Soon, the sharp scent of gunpowder tainted the clean, cold air. They crested a ridge and saw them, a ragged group of men, pushing the stolen cattle hard. Logan raised a hand, signaling his men to spread out. The quiet valley exploded with the crack of rifle fire. Clara slid from her horse, dropping low behind a cluster of frozen pines. She raised the rifle to her shoulder, the cold metal a familiar weight. She wasn't the girl who had been taught to ride side saddle anymore. She was a survivor. Her eyes scanned the chaotic scene. She saw a rustler take aim, his rifle pointed directly at Logan's back. There was no time to think, no time to shout a warning. Her breath puffed out. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder. The shot echoed across the snow. The rustler dropped. Her stomach lurched. The world tilted on its axis. But she didn't hesitate. She worked the lever, chambering another round, her eyes scanning for the next threat. She was a shield, standing between Logan and the darkness. The fight was short and brutal. Outnumbered and outmaneuvered, the remaining rustlers broke and fled, vanishing into the dense trees like phantoms. The silence that fell was deafening, broken only by the nervous bellows of the recovered cattle. The snow was stained with patches of crimson. Clara's body started to shake, the adrenaline leaving her system in a cold, nauseating rush. Logan strode toward her, his face a thundercloud. He grabbed her by the arms, his grip like iron. His eyes were blazing with a terrifying mixture of fury and fear. "You could have been killed," he roared. "So could you," she yelled back, her voice breaking. "Would you rather I had just watched him shoot you?" They stood there, inches apart, chests heaving. The raw, violent emotion of the fight was still crackling between them. It was more than just anger. It was terror. The terror of almost losing something you didn't even realize you treasured. His hands were still clamped on her arms, as if he couldn't decide whether to shake her senseless or pull her against him and never let go. Finally, he let out a long, shuddering breath. "Damn it, Clara," he whispered, the words ragged. "You saved my life." The admission hung in the frozen air between them. It landed on her heart with a weight that felt both wonderful and terrifying. By the time they got the cattle back to the ranch, twilight was painting the snow in shades of purple and gray. Ethan came flying off the porch, throwing himself first at his father, then at Clara. She knelt and held the boy, burying her face in his hair, the scent of wood smoke and innocence a balm to her frayed nerves. Later that night, the house was quiet except for the crackle of the fire. Clara sat at the kitchen table, trying to stitch a tear in her sleeve, but her hands wouldn't stop trembling. Logan appeared in the doorway. He just stood there for a long moment, watching her. The hard edges of his face were softened by the firelight, his eyes shadowed with the weight of the day. "You don't scare easy," he said quietly. She looked up, meeting his gaze across the room. "Neither do you." The silence returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't empty. It was filled with a new, unspoken understanding, a bond forged in loyalty and blood, and the shared terror of a morning that could have ended in tragedy. Something had shifted between them, permanently. And they both knew there was no going back. The ranch house was a pocket of warmth in the vast, freezing dark. The wind had died down, and a heavy silence pressed in from the snow-covered valley. Clara sat by the fire, her mending forgotten in her lap. Her mind kept replaying the image of the rustler falling in the snow. The image of Logan, a clear target. The creak of a floorboard made her look up. Logan stood in the archway, his hat in his hands. He looked uncertain, a look she had never seen on his face before. His eyes were locked on her, and the intensity in them made it hard to breathe. "You should be asleep," she murmured. "So should you." He walked toward her, each step slow and deliberate. The short distance across the room felt like a mile. He stopped in front of her chair, so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. The firelight played across the hard lines of his face, revealing every scar, every worry line. "I told myself," he began, his voice low and raw, "that I would never let anyone get close again. I buried my heart with my wife. I thought it was safer that way. For me. For Ethan." Clara's own heart felt like it was about to beat out of her chest. She swallowed. "I understand. I ran from everything I ever knew because I thought hiding was safer than fighting." Her confession hung in the air, a mirror to his own. "But safety isn't living, Logan," she whispered. "It's just surviving." He sank to one knee in front of her. The movement was so unexpected, so completely out of character for this proud, unbending man, that it stole her breath. The firelight framed him, making him look like a knight from some ancient story. For the first time since she'd met him, the steel in his eyes was gone. All that was left was the man underneath, scarred, grieving, and utterly vulnerable. "When I saw you today," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "standing between me and that rifle, when I see Ethan laugh because of you, He faltered, taking a deep, ragged breath. "I know I can't keep lying to myself anymore. Clara Whitmore, I don't just need your help on this ranch. I don't just need your strength." He looked up at her, his storm-gray eyes pleading. "I need you. Will you be my wife?" The question hit her with the force of a physical blow, a proposal. Here, in this wild place, from this wild, broken man. For so long her life had been about running, about fear. It had been an endless series of goodbyes. Now, someone was asking her to stay. Tears she hadn't realized she was holding back burned her eyes, but when she spoke, her voice was clear and steady. "Yes, Logan. Yes." A tidal wave of relief washed over his face. It was fierce and powerful and beautiful. He surged to his feet, pulling her up from the chair and into his arms. His mouth found hers, not with gentleness, but with the desperate, hungry urgency of a man who had been starving for years and had finally found his way home. It wasn't a kiss of triumph. It was a kiss of surrender. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Clara felt whole. Not because a man had rescued her, but because they had, together, rescued each other. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and silent, blanketing the valley in a fresh layer of white. The storm, at last, was over. But Clara was a fool to believe that. The storm wasn't over, it was just changing shape. A week later, a man rode into Hamilton. He wasn't a rancher. He wasn't a prospector. His suit was too clean, his eyes too sharp. He tied his horse outside the saloon and walked into the general store, the same store where Clara and Logan had stood just weeks before. He laid a crisp, new $100 bill on the counter. "I'm looking for someone," he said to the storekeeper, his voice smooth as polished riverstone. "A woman, dark hair, green eyes. Answers to the name. Well, she might be using a different name now." He slid a folded piece of paper across the counter. It was a wanted poster. Not for a crime of theft or violence. It was for murder. And the face on the poster, sketched in stark black ink, was unmistakably the face of the woman now known as Clara Whitmore. The storekeeper's eyes went wide. He looked from the poster to the money and back again. "Never seen her," he lied, pocketing the bill. But the stranger just smiled, a cold, thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, I think you have," he said. "People in a town this small always know everything." He tipped his hat and walked out, leaving the storekeeper trembling. The news would spread through Hamilton like a wildfire. A killer was hiding in their valley. A killer who had found shelter at the Mallister Ranch. The fragile peace Clara had found was about to be shattered. The ghost from her past had found her. And he wasn't just a ghost. He was a Pinkerton detective, and he had a reputation for never, ever giving up. Clara knew nothing of the storm gathering in town. Her world had become the ranch, the rhythm of the work, the warmth of Ethan's hand in hers, the startling, raw tenderness in Logan's eyes. They were planning a small wedding, a quiet ceremony in the town's little white church. For the first time, she was letting herself imagine a future, a life, a home. It was Ethan who brought the first shadow of the coming darkness. He'd ridden into town with one of the hands to pick up a sack of flour. When he came back, his face was pale, his usual bright energy gone. He found Clara in the barn, currying the black mare she had tamed. "Clara?" he said, his voice small. "Why were the ladies in the store whispering about you?" Clara's hands went still. A cold dread, chillingly familiar, began to creep up her spine. "What were they saying, honey?" They said you were a bad woman. They said you were hiding. Is that true, Clara? Are you hiding?" She forced a smile, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Everyone has things they'd rather forget, Ethan. That's all." But her answer didn't satisfy him. The seed of doubt had been planted, and she knew, with a certainty that made her sick, that it would grow. The poison from town spread quickly. A few days later, Logan rode out to check on a section of fence line and found it deliberately cut, a dozen of his cattle scattered and missing. It wasn't the work of rustlers. This was different. It was a message. When he returned to the ranch, his face was grim. "Something's wrong," he said to Clara, his eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting an attack. "The valley, it feels different. People are looking at me funny, hostile." "It's me," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. "They know something, or they think they do." Before Logan could respond, 2 riders appeared, coming up the long drive to the house. It was the sheriff, a portly man named Blevins, and with him was the stranger, the man in the clean suit, with the cold, dead eyes. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She knew him. His name was Franklin Pierce. He wasn't just a Pinkerton. He had been her father's right-hand man, the enforcer, the one who cleaned up all the messes. He was the last person on earth she ever wanted to see again. Logan stepped in front of her, a protective wall of muscle and anger. "Sheriff, what can I do for you?" Sheriff Blevins looked uncomfortable. He wouldn't meet Logan's eyes. "Logan, this man, Mr. Pierce, he has a warrant. For her." He gestured vaguely at Clara. Pierce smiled his thin reptilian smile. "The warrant is for Abigail Montgomery, for the murder of her father, Senator Charles Montgomery." He let the name hang in the air, a stunning, explosive revelation. Logan's body went rigid. He didn't turn, didn't look at her. But Clara felt the shock that went through him as if it were a physical blow. Abigail Montgomery, a name she had buried 1,000 miles away. "You've made a mistake," Logan said, his voice a low growl. "This is Clara Whitmore." "Is it?" Pierce's gaze slid past Logan to fix on her. "Tell him, Abigail. Tell your new protector who you really are. Tell him why you ran." The world seemed to shrink until it was just the 4 of them in the dusty yard. The secret she had carried for so long was out, a venomous snake uncoiled at her feet. She looked at Logan's stiff, unyielding back. She saw the confusion and fear in Ethan's eyes, watching from the porch window. Her past had not just caught up with her. It had come to burn her new life to the ground. And standing there, with the cold eyes of the law upon her, Clara knew the truth. She hadn't run far enough. "It's a lie," Clara said, her voice shaking but clear. She took a step out from behind Logan, forcing herself to meet Pierce's cold gaze. "My father was a controlling, cruel man, but I didn't kill him." Pierce let out a short, humorless laugh. "Of course not. You just happened to be the only one in the room with him when he was shot, with your pistol, just after he threatened to have you committed for refusing to marry the man he'd chosen for you. It's all just a terrible coincidence." Every word was a hammer blow, twisting the truth into a weapon. Logan finally turned to look at her. His face was a mask of stone, his gray eyes unreadable. She couldn't tell if he was looking at a liar, a murderer, or the woman he'd asked to be his wife. The silence stretched, thick with betrayal and doubt. "Get off my land," Logan said, his voice dangerously quiet. He wasn't looking at Pierce. He was looking at the sheriff. "Both of you." Sheriff Blevins shifted his weight, his hand hovering near the pistol on his hip. "Now, Logan, I can't just ignore a warrant." You have a warrant for someone named Abigail Montgomery. Logan cut in, his voice like cracking ice. This woman is Clara Whitmore. She works for me. If you want her, you'll come back with proof. Until then, you are trespassing. Pierce's smile widened. He had gotten exactly what he wanted. He had planted the poison. As you wish, Mallister. But know this. I'm not leaving the valley, and I always get what I came for. He turned his horse and rode away, the sheriff trailing reluctantly behind him. The moment they were gone, the false strength that had been holding Clara up evaporated. Her knees felt weak. She looked at Logan, desperate for a sign, for anything other than the cold, shuttered expression on his face. Is it true? He asked. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Is your name Abigail Montgomery? She could only nod, the lump in her throat too big to speak past. And the rest of it? He's twisting it, Logan. My father. He was a monster. He was going to ruin my life, lock me away. We fought. The gun. It went off by accident. I never meant to. Her words tumbled out, a frantic, desperate plea for him to believe her. He just stared at her, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped. He looked at her as if she were a complete stranger, a dangerous stranger he had foolishly let into his home, into his heart. Without another word, he turned and strode toward the barn, leaving her standing alone in the yard. The wall between them was back, higher and colder than ever before. She had been so close to a new life, so close to being free. Now she was trapped, hunted by the law, and judged by the one man she had allowed herself to trust. The silence from Logan was a physical weight, pressing down on her, suffocating her. He didn't speak to her, he didn't look at her. He moved around the ranch like a ghost, his face a grim, impenetrable mask. The wedding plans were forgotten. The future they had spoken of by the fire had vanished like smoke. The only person who still looked at her with trust was Ethan. He didn't understand the words murder or warrant, but he understood the cold silence that had fallen over his home. He would creep to her side, slipping his small hand into hers, his gray eyes full of a sorrow that broke her heart. The valley had turned against them. Old friends of Logan's in town now turned their backs when he rode in. Supplies he ordered were suddenly out of stock. Whispers followed him everywhere. The woman at the Mallister Ranch was a killer, an East Coast socialite who had murdered her own father, and Logan Mallister was a fool for protecting her. Pressure was mounting, and Pierce was the one applying it. He was a patient spider, spinning his web from his room at the town's only hotel. He didn't need to confront them again. He just needed to wait. He was letting the town do his work for him. Clara knew she couldn't stay. She was poison to this family. She was going to destroy everything Logan had worked his whole life to build. One night, after Logan had gone to his room and the house was dark, she packed her small satchel. It was the same one she had arrived with, holding the same few meager possessions. She scribbled a note, her hands trembling, the words blurring through her tears. I'm sorry. It was all true. Forgive me. It was a lie. A final, terrible lie meant to protect him. If they thought she was admitting her guilt, maybe they would leave him and Ethan alone once she was gone. She crept out of the house, the cold night air a slap in the face. She would head north, try to lose herself in the wilderness. It was a fool's hope, but it was the only one she had. She made it as far as the stable. She was reaching for the latch on the chestnut gelding's stall when a voice came out of the darkness. Going somewhere? Logan was standing there, a lantern in his hand, his shadow stretching long and menacing behind him. I have to leave, Logan, she whispered, her voice cracking. I'm destroying you. Running again, Abigail? He asked, the name a deliberate cruelty. It's not my name, she cried, the tears finally breaking free. And I didn't kill him. But it doesn't matter what I say. Pierce will never stop. He'll ruin you to get to me. He took a step closer, the lantern light illuminating the exhaustion and conflict on his face. "This afternoon," he said, his voice low, "a man from another ranch rode over. Said his name was Silas Blackwood. Owns the land to the east. Said he heard I was having some trouble." Clara frowned, confused by the sudden change of subject. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Blackwood offered to buy me out," Logan continued, his eyes boring into hers. "Said it might be best for me and the boy to move on. Start fresh somewhere new." He said it with a smile on his face. A cold chill that had nothing to do with the night air washed over Clara. "You see," Logan said, taking another step closer. "My wife. She didn't just get sick and die. She was killed, thrown from her horse. A horse that had been her favorite, gentle as a lamb. But someone had put a burr under her saddle blanket. It was meant to look like an accident." He stopped, now just an arm's length away. "I always suspected it was Blackwood. He's wanted my land for years, wants the water rights from the creek that runs through it. But I could never prove it. Now, all of a sudden, my whole world is falling apart, and there he is, smiling, offering to take my troubles off my hands." He raised the lantern, and in its golden light, she saw that the cold fury in his eyes wasn't directed at her. It was for someone else entirely. "I don't know if you're a killer, Clara. My gut tells me you're not. But I know a predator when I see one, and right now there are two of them circling my home, Pierce and Blackwood, and I'm starting to think they might be hunting together." He reached out and gently took the satchel from her hand. "You're not running anywhere," he said, his voice no longer cold, but a low, dangerous growl. "This is your home now, and we don't run from this home. We fight for it." The revelation struck Clara with the force of a physical blow. Logan's wife. Murdered. It wasn't grief that had frozen him. It was rage. A cold, simmering rage that had no outlet, no target he could prove. Until now. This wasn't just about her past anymore. It was about his. The two storms had finally merged into one. "Blackwood," she whispered, the name tasting like poison. "He's using Pierce. Using my past as a weapon to drive you out." "Exactly," Logan affirmed, his eyes glinting with a new, dangerous light. "Pierce creates the chaos, isolates me from my neighbors. Blackwood swoops in to pick up the pieces. It's a perfect plan. But knowing the plan and stopping it were two different things. They were trapped. Pierce had the law on his side, and Blackwood had the valley's fear. They were alone, an island in a sea of suspicion. "What do we do?" Clara asked, her voice barely audible. "First," Logan said, setting the lantern down, "you tell me everything. Not the story you tell sheriffs or strangers. The truth. The whole truth of what happened that night with your father." So she did. In the quiet darkness of the stable, surrounded by the warm, living breath of the horses, she finally unburdened herself. She told him about her father, the powerful senator, a man who was a saint in public and a tyrant in private. She told him about the arranged marriage to a man 3 times her age, a political alliance to secure her father's power. She told him about the argument, the shouting, the terror when he'd locked the door to his study. "He pulled the gun from his desk drawer," she said, her voice trembling at the memory. "He told me if I wouldn't be a dutiful daughter, I'd be no daughter at all. He said he would declare me insane, have me put away where no one would ever see me again. I tried to grab the gun from him. We struggled, and it went off." She was sobbing now, the horror of that night washing over her again. "I didn't even know he was. I just ran. I ran, and didn't look back. Pierce was there, in the house. He saw me run. He's always been loyal to my father's memory, to the power of the family name. He believes I'm a monster who murdered his patron." Logan listened in complete silence, his expression unreadable. When she was finished, her story hanging in the air between them like a ghost, he simply nodded. "All right," he said. "Now we know what we're fighting." The next few days were a tense, quiet siege. They moved with a shared purpose, a silent understanding passing between them. The wedding was never mentioned, but the promise behind it, the promise of a shared future, was what fueled them. This was their first battle as partners. The first move came not from Pierce, but from the land itself. A fire. It started in the dry timber at the northern edge of Logan's property, a deliberate, fast-moving blaze that threatened to sweep down and consume the entire ranch. It was meant to destroy them, to burn them out. Logan rallied his few loyal hands, but it was a hopeless fight against the wind-whipped flames. As they battled the fire line, Clara noticed something. The fire was pushing them all in one direction, away from the ranch house, away from Ethan. A cold, sickening dread washed over her. "It's a diversion," she breathed. She looked at Logan, her eyes wide with terror. "Someone is going for the house, for Ethan." Without waiting for his reply, she spun her horse around and galloped back, the smoke stinging her eyes, her heart pounding with a terror far greater than any she had ever felt for herself. The ranch yard was eerily quiet, shrouded in a pall of smoke. She slid from her horse, the rifle Logan had given her clutched in her hands. The front door was slightly ajar. She crept inside, her boots silent on the wooden floor. The house was empty. "Ethan!" she called out, her voice a strained whisper. Silence. She ran to his room. Empty. His bed was unmade, his little wooden horse lying on the floor. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. Then she heard it, a muffled sound from the root cellar. She flew to the cellar door, her hands fumbling with the latch. She threw it open and peered down into the darkness. Ethan was there, huddled in a corner, his eyes wide with fear. But he wasn't alone. A man stood over him, one of Logan's own ranch hands, a man named Jeb. He held a knife in his hand. "Jeb!" Clara gasped, leveling the rifle. "What are you doing?" Jeb's face was slick with sweat and fear. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Mr. Blackwood. He paid me. He said just to scare the boy a little, make Mr. Mallister see that he couldn't keep his family safe here." The betrayal was stunning. The enemy wasn't just outside the gates, he had been inside their home all along. "Get away from him," Clara ordered, her voice deadly calm. "I can't," Jeb whimpered. "He'll kill me." "I'll kill you if you don't," she replied, the rifle unwavering in her hands. A floorboard creaked behind her. Before she could turn, a heavy blow struck the side of her head. The world exploded in a shower of black stars, and she crumpled to the floor. Her last conscious thought was of the cold, smiling face of Silas Blackwood, standing in the doorway behind her. He had a pistol in his hand. "Looks like the hunt is over," he said. When Clara woke, her head was throbbing, the world a blurry, nauseating mess. She was on the floor of the main room, her hands tied roughly behind her back. Ethan was next to her, also bound, his face streaked with tears. Silas Blackwood was sitting in Logan's favorite chair by the cold fireplace, the pistol resting casually on his knee. The traitor, Jeb, stood nervously by the window. "Welcome back," Blackwood said with a lazy smile. "Your timing is impeccable. Your rancher friend should be riding back into our little trap any minute now." Clara struggled against her ropes. "You won't get away with this." Blackwood laughed. "My dear, I already have. The fire will be blamed on rustlers. When Mallister is found dead, shot while resisting arrest by the esteemed Mr. Pierce, it will be a tragedy. The town will shake its head and say he was a fool to harbor a murderess, and I will generously offer to take this poor, orphaned boy in and buy up this sad, unlucky piece of land." He had thought of everything. He had woven a web so tight there was no escape. Outside, they heard the sound of a single horse approaching at a gallop. "Showtime," Blackwood grinned, getting to his feet. "Jeb, you know what to do." Jeb, looking sick, nodded and went to the door. "Mr. Mallister," he yelled out. "It's Blackwood. He's got Clara and the boy." It was the bait. Logan would come charging in, blind with rage and fear for his son, and walk straight into Blackwood's pistol. Clara's mind raced. She had to do something. She looked at Ethan, at his terrified little face, and a fire she didn't know she possessed roared to life inside her. She shuffled on the floor, getting closer to the fireplace. Her fingers brushed against something hard and metal. The fire poker. Logan's voice boomed from outside. "Blackwood, let them go! This is between you and me!" "Come on in, Mallister!" Blackwood shouted back, his smile widening. "The door's open!" Clara knew she had one chance. As Blackwood turned his attention toward the door, she hooked her bound hands around the heavy iron poker. With a surge of adrenaline, she got her feet under her and lunged upward, swinging the poker in a wide, desperate arc. The iron head slammed into the back of Blackwood's knee. He roared in pain, his leg buckling, the pistol fired, the shot going wild, shattering a window. That was the signal Logan needed. He burst through the door, not like a grieving victim, but like an avenging angel. He wasn't alone. Behind him were three of his most loyal hands, rifles raised. Blackwood had miscalculated. He had assumed Logan would come alone. He had underestimated the loyalty Logan inspired, and he had underestimated the woman tied up on the floor. The fight was over before it began. Jeb dropped his knife and threw his hands up in surrender. Blackwood, clutching his shattered knee, was quickly disarmed. Logan rushed to Clara and Ethan, cutting their ropes with his knife. He pulled them both into a fierce embrace, his body trembling with the aftershock of what had almost happened. "It's over," he murmured into Clara's hair. "It's finally over." But it wasn't. Just as the relief began to settle in, another figure appeared in the doorway. Franklin Pierce. He held his own pistol, and it was aimed directly at Clara's heart. "Drop your weapons," Pierce commanded, his voice as cold and empty as a winter grave. "The woman is coming with me." "It's over, Pierce," Logan growled, stepping in front of Clara again. "Blackwood has confessed to everything, to setting the fire, to killing my wife, to hiring you to create a smokescreen." Pierce's eyes flickered toward Blackwood for a fraction of a second. "He's a liar." "Are you sure about that?" a new voice said. Sheriff Blevins stepped into the room from behind Pierce. He didn't look flustered or corrupt anymore. He looked grimly determined, and the shotgun he was holding was pointed right at the back of the Pinkerton detective. "I heard the whole thing," the sheriff said. "The whole sordid plan. Seems you backed the wrong horse, Mr. Pierce, conspiring with a known murderer. That's a long time in a federal prison." Pierce's face for the first time showed a crack in its perfect, cold composure. He was trapped. His reputation, his career, his freedom, all gone. He looked at Clara, his eyes filled with a pure, undiluted hatred. His whole life had been dedicated to the service of the Montgomery family, to its power and its pristine image. Clara, by existing, by being the living proof of the senator's secret tyranny, had destroyed all of it. With a snarl, he made his choice. If he was going down, he was taking her with him. He swung his pistol toward Clara, but Ethan, small, silent Ethan, who had been hiding behind Logan, did something no one expected. He threw his little wooden horse. It was a child's desperate act, but it was enough. The small piece of wood struck Pierce's wrist just as he squeezed the trigger. The shot went wide, burying itself in the ceiling. In the next second, Logan was on him, a blur of motion and fury. He struck Pierce with a single devastating blow, and the detective crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Silence descended on the room, broken only by the sound of ragged breathing. It was finally, truly, over. Spring came late to the Bitterroot Valley that year, but when it came, it was with a fierce, life-affirming beauty. The snow melted, the creek swelled, and the hills exploded into a riot of green and wildflower gold. It was a time of new beginnings. The small white church in Hamilton was packed. The entire valley, it seemed, had come. They had heard the story. The truth about the death of Logan's wife, about the villainy of Silas Blackwood, and about the quiet courage of the woman who had come to the Mallister ranch in the middle of a storm. The whispers that had once followed Clara down the street were now replaced with nods of respect and warm, friendly smiles. Clara stood at the back of the church. She wore a simple cream-colored dress that she had sewn herself. In her hair, she had tucked a single wild bluebell that Ethan had picked for her that morning. Her heart was beating a steady, calm rhythm. She was no longer Abigail Montgomery, the runaway. She was Clara Whitmore, a survivor, a woman who had found her home. Ethan stood beside her, wearing a new suit, looking terribly grown up. He held her hand tightly. "Are you ready?" he whispered. She smiled down at him. "Only if you'll walk me." The boy puffed out his chest, his storm-gray eyes shining with pride. "Let's go, then. Pa's waiting." Together they walked down the sun-drenched aisle. Logan stood at the altar, tall and strong, his gaze locked on her. The harsh lines on his face had softened, replaced by a deep and abiding love. When he took her hands in his, it wasn't a question anymore. It was a certainty, a promise. The preacher's words were simple and true, echoing the vows they had already made to each other in blood and fire and trust. When Logan bent to kiss her, it was with a gentle reverence that sealed their future. The church erupted in cheers, but all Clara could hear was Ethan's joyful shout. Later, they stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Logan's arm was wrapped around her shoulders, and Ethan stood between them, holding both their hands. The land before them was peaceful. Their land, their future. Life here would never be easy. The frontier was an unforgiving place. There would always be storms on the horizon, but they would face them together, as a family. Clara leaned her head against Logan's shoulder and breathed in the scent of pine and clean, fresh earth. She had run so far, for so long, only to find that everything she had ever been searching for was right here. She was home. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next tale of courage and survival in the untamed West. And tell us in the comments what you thought of Clara's incredible journey. Your support helps us keep these stories alive. Thank you for watching.